Mr. Mayor, in a sense, what's happening right now is we have a CEO of a country, Donald J. Trump, who's asking for an extension of his contract. And the question for the board of directors, all the voters, is do we renew the contract or do we make a change? Give us the strongest argument for renewing the contract for Donald J. Trump as our president.
The economy until the pandemic was almost flawless. I mean, it was one of our best economies. He would argue the best, but certainly you'd have to put it there with one of the best. And it was particularly good economy for poor people. It was the highest number of jobs for African Americans, the highest wages, the lowest unemployment for African Americans and Hispanics. So the whole idea that his economic reforms would just help the wealthy turned out to not be true. They did the most, and a lot more than prior administrations, for middle class, lower middle class, and poor people. And it seemed like with the trade deals and everything else, the economy's trajectory was straight up. Then the pandemic happened. We had a hit to our economy, massive hit to our economy. But in terms of the comeback, it's been a lot better than expected. The first group of job numbers was supposed to be like 8 million lost. Instead, he gained 9.5 million. Unemployment is at about 10 or 11%. When I became mayor of New York, unemployment was 10.5%. So it's a terrible number, but we're not in anywhere near the depression territory we thought we would be. He's already demonstrated his ability to manage us through economic problems. So I think that's the reason why he should be rehired. But the second thing is we have a world that's relatively at peace. We're losing far fewer American lives than at any time in the last 8-10 years. We've got definite problems with China. We've got definite problems with North Korea. We've got definite problems with Iran. But he inherited all those. He didn't create them. He hasn't made them any worse. And arguably, the case of North Korea, at least he set up a discussion channel that wasn't there before. Case of China, he's been taking actions that needed to be taken that had never been taken before to straighten out the imbalance in trade. And so I think it's been a very, very strong presidency. And I think the major objection to him is personality, not performance.
So one of the questions is not just what happened in the first 4 years of the Trump administration, but what would happen in the next 4 as we decide who should lead the country going forward. You point to the economic success. I think a fair amount of that was because of a massive tax cut. And we can say that was a good idea or a bad idea. But would you anticipate that sort of tax cut to be renewed in order to keep the growth going?
I actually thought, David, that the economic recovery really got propelled before the tax cuts by the massive regulatory cuts. And I frankly think they were more important. I mean, I remember campaigning with him for 5 straight months in 2016. And I was educated in very much the same way as he was. We began thinking tax cuts, like with Kennedy and Reagan, would be the answer. And when we started talking to business people, big and small, they were telling us we'd rather have regulatory relief than tax cuts. We're getting killed more with regulation than we are with tax cuts. So before he could get the tax cut through Congress, he did his own regulatory reform, which is only about 1/3 done because a lot of them are long-term regulations that have to be dealt with. So I don't know that we need another tax cut. I believe he thinks we do, and he knows more about it than I do. I sure know one thing: we don't need a big tax increase right now. I think Joe Biden's going to be talked out of that. Even if he could argue for a tax increase at some point, this is not the time to do it. When our economy, we're doing everything we can to try to get our economy on a very stable footing. You don't pull out trillions of dollars from the private economy.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, you said that if you just look at the record of Donald J. Trump, he wouldn't have very much trouble getting reelected at all. But there are other aspects to this, some of the ways he expresses himself, some of the tweets, things like that. You're close to President Trump. There are other advisors who are very smart, very wise, who talk with him. Surely you all must have said, if you just tone it down some, you'll do a lot better. You're making it harder for yourself. Why doesn't he do that?
Well, I worked for President Reagan. And I remember when he lost the first debate to Mondale, and Mrs. Reagan said, let Ronnie be Ronnie and let Reagan be Reagan. We're all a combination of complexities. And at first I used to get nervous about the tweeting, but I now realize that even though every single one of them doesn't work, this is a remarkable opportunity for him to communicate with his people. And since he isn't, I think I'm understating this, the most beloved by the press or vice versa, I'm not sure he gets a fair interpretation. So the only way he can really overcome that is by direct communication. And he's probably the president who has directly communicated with the public more than anyone else. And I'd argue that he actually has opened up a new way for leaders to communicate with their people.